It's a remnant volcano that's been isolated for a long period of time, so it's going to have biodiversity that's very unique. The Lord Howe Island phasmid became extinct on Lord Howe Island because of the influence of rats. Recently, in 2001, it was discovered on BallsPyramidH, and that makes BallsPyramidH extremely unique because it means it's the only place in the world where this phasmid exists. BallsPyramidH is extremely important for the survival of that, the Lord Howe Island phasmid. We've come here to do a survey of the biodiversity of BallsPyramidH and to look for the Lord Howe Island phasmid, which is extinct from Lord Howe Island, and we're wanting to do a survey of the phasmid and hopefully bring back one or more phasmids for assisting the Melbourne Zoo breeding program.
Landing on the pyramid, well, obviously that's really one of the hardest things of the expedition, because unless you can land on it, you can't climb it. We were lucky we were landing on the southeast end, which has a sort of a hook which gives it a harbour sort of situation, and also within that hook it's very deep water and it comes out steeply. So if the waves are down, you'll find it swell rather than surf because the water's very deep, and that makes it easy to get out of the water. Also, we were lucky when we landed that the wind was from the north, because if it come from the south, which is the direction the harbour faces, it'd be whipping up the waves and making it extremely difficult to land.
So after landing, we, a couple of us assembled our gear and headed off around out of sight from the base camp in order to find an easy route up to get established with some fixed lines. And fixed lines was one of the methods we chose early on, which would mean that we'd be able to move up and down at will, avoiding bad weather, setting particular search areas in preparation for nightly field work.
As a climber, BallsPyramidH is a kind of iconic route, although it's difficult and not great rock climbing per se, but a magnificent and a magical place to be. So I've always been interested in climbing it. I like adventurous climbing, but the opportunity to actually do some meaningful scientific work, I guess as a doctor as well, I do consider myself a scientist, so yeah, it's been great to be looking at insects and taking an interest in the natural world and looking at things in minute detail and sitting and having time to watch nature go by.
4 or 5 days we've been setting up the ropes and getting camps set up so we can then work out from those to sampling areas up on the rock. We're getting close to being at that point where we can spend more time sampling and not so much time setting up the ropes. We've done a bit of sampling down the bottom. We're going to do more of that today and tomorrow night in particular. So we're starting to look good now for doing proper sampling. The challenges being faced by the climbers in getting up to where they are at the moment is the rock, particularly down the bottom, for putting anchors and stuff into is quite tricky. It's quite crumbly, so they have to be very careful about how they go about doing that. Getting up higher, obviously you've got the wind, which isn't as bad as down here at base camp. Base camp we seem to be getting the worst of the wind, but just coordinating everything up there, communications. We've got good communications. Every now and again they get around the other side of the mountain and we can't hear them, so they've got to get back to a place where we can hear them. It's a challenging environment, but it's not impossible.
Paul, the bivvy where we left the water.
Well, the main thing really is fear, because the height from the sea and you know, just hanging out over, you know, sort of a 450, 500 metre drop is pretty scary. So in the end, you've got to have faith in your equipment, you've got to have faith in the rope, you've got to have faith in the people around you, you've got to have faith in your own technical expertise to get out of trouble if you do get into trouble. And then again, you've got to rely on your friends if you do get into trouble, that they can get you out of trouble. In sort of looking down that distance to the sea and being right up there, it is pretty scary, but there are cases where people looking down those sorts of things have just frozen and not been able to move.
In particular, difficulties of searching at night are that you, of course, only have the vision extending from your headlamp. So having those fixed ropes back to our bivvy sites, which were often tight little caves, we would set up, move out, wait for darkness and begin the search, which is hands-on in the dirt or in amongst the trees whilst hanging off of ropes. So in some of the examples we're hanging with sheer drops of 400 metres below us, sheer vertical drop. So in some regard, hanging off the rope in the dark and not being able to see further than your hands was in fact a bit of an advantage, because you couldn't see the exposure and the drop and the the scope of where you were. It kept you focused on what you're doing. It was more so when you return in the morning to take a wider survey and that you realise, oh dear, that's quite a drop.
I knew there were phasmids up there, and this is our last chance to find a female. I'd only ever seen males in that section. So I started up the first rope and couldn't see any at all, not even on the bushes. We'd seen them before, so it was a bit despondent, but we'd set up another rope parallel about 2 metres to the right, so I thought, well, I may as well go up there. So I started up and then saw one, and it turned out to be a male, and we'd already had another male sighting that night, and went a bit higher, and then we decided we would capture the male, so at least we had one phasmid in the tube. So I'd got him and then moved 2 metres higher to another quite large bush, which we'd surveyed numerous times, and right at the back on a branch, a fairly sort of wide branch, the female phasmid was, and I could tell by the size, and then I could see our ovipositor that, yeah, it was a female, a long sought female. So I grabbed her as well very gently and popped her in the tube. I actually feel a bit bad. I think they're sitting up there quite happily and we've interfered with their life. But I think for the scientific purpose of understanding them, hopefully reintroducing them, it's been all worthwhile. It's a great privilege to have a phasmid and be one of the few people in the world to get a live one.
Humans are curious creatures, and we want to understand the world that we are living in, and we want to understand how species are able to survive and how do they adapt to environments. So studying an old, very old island that has slowly decayed and is now just a barren rock, to see what happened to its original fauna is an interesting question, because then that allows us to also look into the future, what happens to the fauna of other islands.